Welcome to Get Sleepy, the podcast where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. My name's Tom, and I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in. Tonight, we'll step back in time to 19th century England and visit the home of Jane Austen, the author of many world-renowned books. Make yourself nice and comfortable in bed. Take a deep breath in, gently lifting your shoulders and allowing any tension to collect there. Then breathe back out, letting the shoulders fall and the tension to flow all the way down and out through the tips of your toes. Let's do 2 more of those. Breathing in, holding the tension for a moment, and release. Breathe in once more. Really squeeze the shoulders this time. And breathe out, letting it all flow away. Just notice the sensations of your body now as you relax more deeply into bed. If there's still some areas of tension, continue with those slower breaths, releasing it bit by bit. And just reassure yourself that you are in the best place for a good night's sleep. This cozy, peaceful spot is yours to enjoy. There's no pressure to do anything, to think about anything. No need to problem solve or replay events that have come and gone. Your attention can rest solely on our story now. Your imagination can help you picture the scenes. And gradually, in time, you'll drift off to sleep, softly and naturally. As you begin to make your way to sleep, allow your mind to drift back in time to Jane Austen's England at the start of the 19th century.
The year is 1813, and in many ways it's a fascinating time to be alive. England is at the tail end of King George III's reign. His declining condition has left his son George formally ruling under the title of Prince Regent since 1811. History will determine these years, the Regency period, characterized by exciting developments in art and architecture, politics, fashion, and literature. It's a time of change within society and for the upper classes, a period of refinement and culture, a mini renaissance of sorts. It's also the age of Jane Austen, the beloved writer whose humour, wit, and biting social commentary will long outlast Regency Britain. Her novels will be lauded for their romantic realism and strong female characters, producing loyal fans for centuries to come. Her words will inspire prequels, sequels, imitations, and adaptations from the stage to the silver screen. It's quite the legacy for the daughter of a village rector. Let's join her now at her home in the picturesque village of Chawton, Hampshire, in southeast England. It's a perfect summer's morning, neither too warm nor too cool. The sky is a bright, flawless blue, crowned with a golden sun. It casts a soothing glow over everything beneath it, including our writer, who is taking a quiet stroll around the vast cottage garden. Jane's appearance is much like you might expect from an English rose of the early 1800s. Her cheeks are blush pink, the same rosy hue as her lips. The dainty features of her face are framed by ringlets of chocolatey brown curls at the front, and the rest of her hair is pinned up into a stylish chignon or loose bun. She wears a full-length Regency-style dress, drawn in under the chest and loose and flowing beneath it. It's a relatively plain ensemble, in many ways similar to a nightgown. The white cotton fabric looks soft and comfortable. The only jewellery on display is a turquoise and gold ring worn on Jane's right hand, and the delicate cross of topaz and gold that decorates her neckline. Her sister, Cassandra, has the same necklace, and like Jane, wears it each and every day. The necklace has sentimental value, being a gift from their brother Charles, who purchased it with prize money he earned in the Royal Navy. And it's a beautiful piece, adding a touch of classic elegance to the author's appearance. In fact, dressed as she is, and with movements so measured and graceful, one might easily mistake her for a character from one of her novels. Those close to her will say that writing has been Jane's dearest pleasure since childhood, when she began entertaining her family with readings of her work. By the age of 17, she had resolved to make a career of it, though unbeknownst to her, it would be nearly 2 full decades before she would become a published author. As we find her now, 37-year-old Jane has released 2 novels. The first, entitled Sense and Sensibility, was published on commission 2 years ago. The author was left anonymous, being described only as a lady. This was a bit risky, for had the novel proven unpopular, Jane herself would have been responsible for covering the printing costs. Thankfully, it was a risk that paid off, and Sense and Sensibility was very well received. In fact, only last week, Jane got a letter from her publisher stating that all 750 copies had now sold out. Sense and Sensibility left Jane with a profit of £140, a substantial amount for a woman of the 19th century. And thanks to its success, she was able to sell the copyright of her second novel, Pride and Prejudice, earning £110 outright. It was published this January. It too was very successful. In fact, had she chosen to publish again by commission, she would have earned her father's annual income twice over. Again, the novel was published anonymously, but this time around, it was billed as being written by the author of Sense and Sensibility. So despite remaining nameless, Jane's reputation is growing, as is the demand for her brand of social satire and realism. The Prince Regent himself is said to be a fan, though Jane herself cares little for him. She is known to jest that she writes only for the fame. But if you were to watch her at work, there would be no doubt you're in the presence of someone doing what they love. For Jane, writing is about much more than telling a story. As the daughter of a rector, she has a strong moral compass. This sense of morality is at the heart of each novel she writes. It's why so many of her readers are left pondering the merits and fates of different characters, comparing the value of riches and status against the integrity of their actions. This hour before breakfast belongs to Jane. Often she'll use this time to practice piano in the solitude of the drawing room. But on days as lovely as this, it seems improper to stay inside. She relishes the time alone with nature and the quiet contemplation it allows. Within the private sanctuary of these grounds, bounded by high wooden fences on one side and hornbeam hedges on the other, she is an image of blissful contentment. She ambles about the garden now, enjoying acres of spongy grass beneath her slippers. Every so often, she pauses and simply breathes, taking in that fresh countryside air. Occasionally, she closes her eyes and listens to the buzzing of bees the chatter of birds, and the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. Mostly, though, she walks and observes, taking in the sights of the sun-drenched garden. She admires the flowers, plants, and shrubberies as if truly seeing them for the first time. Such is her nature that she never fails to appreciate the textures, shades, shapes, and details that she encounters. She is quick to note any changes, no matter how small or subtle, brought about by the ever-shifting weather and seasons. Jane is particularly fond of the garden in summer, in part because many of its fruits are ripe and ready for picking. It's no surprise then that the first part of her journey takes her between two shrubberies towards the vegetable and fruit patch where much of the family's food is grown. There, her eyes are immediately drawn to the ruby red of wild strawberries. Suspended like jewels from drooping stems in amongst a patch of greenery, their attractions prove too great. Moving closer, Jane pulls one of the fruits towards her, removing it from its stem and examining it more closely. Every inch of its scarlet flesh is decorated with a pattern of tiny, light green seeds, sunken ever so slightly into position. Its skin is so glossy that it reflects patches of sunlight from above. Jane turns it in her fingers, watching the patterns change with wonder. Bringing it to her nose, she takes in its fresh, fruity scent. Without hesitation, she bites into the sweet, juicy flesh, and then, wearing an expression of contentment and mischief, she wanders on, reflecting on another reason for her love of summer. At this time of year, the garden is thriving. The trees are abundant with rich emerald leaves, and the flowers are in bloom, showcasing a whole spectrum of vibrant colour. There is the light purple of lilacs and the deep sea blue of cornflowers. They stand beside the powder pink hollyhocks and pure white dangling snowdrops. A particular favourite of Jane's are the antique roses, which will become the ancestors of the roses in British gardens centuries later. They alone display stunning shades of cream, yellow, orange, and crimson. She pauses by them now, sitting down at one of her favourite spots in the garden, the stone bench surrounded by roses. The air here is magical, As soon as Jane sits, she is aware of a unique but familiar perfume that enraptures and enlivens the senses. The rosy scent ebbs and flows on the breeze. Every so often, a gust of wind hits the blooms and causes a tidal wave of fragrance to wash over her. This place is Jane's sanctuary. She could sit here for hours, just contemplating the beauty of these flowers. Those closest to her are a beautiful shade of pastel yellow, reminiscent of an early morning sunrise. Climbing towards the sky on thorny stems, the rosebuds dance upon the air in bundles of swaying colour. Today, one particularly striking rose pokes out beyond the bush, seeming to invite further inspection. Seeing this, Jane leans in and touches the cup-like flower. She gently strokes the soft, velvety petals before moving closer to smell the irresistibly dreamy fragrance of the bloom. Jane sits here upon the bench, basking in her surroundings for some time longer, looking over the garden and the house. What a beautiful building it is, with its red brick facade and terracotta roof tiles, gleaming white window frames and doorways complete the look. Parts of the walls are decorated with lush ivy that shines bottle green in the sunlight. It's an exterior that is quintessentially English, a large country house with outbuildings and a courtyard. And yet it has the aura of a small, cozy cottage. By this point in time, the building itself is some 300 years old, dating back to about the 1500s. Initially, it was a farmhouse, which was later used as a coaching inn until it was purchased by the Knight family in 1769. From then on, it became part of their larger Chawton estate. The Knights were distant relatives of the Austens, and having no children of their own, legally adopted Jane's brother, Edward, as their heir. When he later inherited the estate, he kindly offered this cottage to his widowed mother and unmarried sisters, Cassandra and Jane. They've lived here quite happily since 1809, alongside a family friend, Martha Lloyd. As a middle-class family and relatives of the head of the estate, they are supported by a cook and a couple of maidservants. They live like Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility, and the Bennet family in Pride and Prejudice. As many authors do, Jane Austen writes what is familiar to her. In other words, she writes what she knows. People, places, routines and rituals present in the daily lives of her fictional characters are sometimes borrowed from her own life. As such, readers of her work are given a picture of what life is like for middle-class women in the 1800s and what is generally expected of them. Unlike their wealthier counterparts, the ladies of the Austen family are generally expected to contribute to the running of the household, particularly in the kitchen. Mrs. Austen tends to the herbs, fruit, and vegetables in the garden, whilst Cassandra and Martha take the lion's share of the work alongside the cook. Jane is charged with preparing the family breakfast, which is usually served around 9 o'clock in the morning. In fact, she's heading to the kitchen to do just that, only she suspects that her efforts might not be needed today. The smell of freshly baked bread emanates from the outdoor bakehouse to the left of the main building. Through the open kitchen window ahead, Jane hears the clinking of plates and cutlery, punctuated by the sounds of friendly conversation. Wandering across the stone floor of the kitchen, Jane is met by the merry faces of her family and a marvelous spread laid out over the thick wooden table in the center of the room. Martha and Cassandra have already performed Jane's duties on her behalf and arranged a feast of breads, brioche, and cakes. It's a kind gesture that Jane surely appreciates. Each of the women picks up as much as they can carry before moving into the dining parlour. This is a small room, but a beautiful one, from the gleaming wooden floorboards to the beams that line its pristine white ceiling. The wallpaper is particularly attractive, with a design of vibrant green leaves known as Chawton leaf. In the middle of the room is a square wooden table, just the right size for 4 women. Opposite this is a large white-framed window which floods the room with daylight, while also offering a view of passers-by upon the village street. Mrs. Austen, the family matriarch, is already here when the others enter. Hovering beside the fireplace, she watches over a large, boiling copper kettle which sits upon the cast iron fire grate. The water is used to brew delicious tea. The dishes are quickly laid out upon the table, and the merry household sits down to their Regency breakfast. Breads and cakes are passed around the table without a single pause in the chatter, though the pace slows down somewhat once the food is all served. Jane chews slowly on a sweet pound cake washing it down with warm, milky tea. It's just the refreshment she craves after her morning in the garden. Once appetites have been satisfied, the ladies are content to sit, discussing and debating the hot topics of society, and occasionally passing comment on those they notice through the window. Jane's wit and humour are second to none, but she is also kind and compassionate. The conversation is never dull. In fact, the whole group is lively this morning and eager to talk and drink tea until they can do so no more. At last, their appetite for both runs dry. Then, as is routine, Cassandra and Martha tidy the breakfast things, whilst Jane moves to a small wooden table positioned beside the window. Here she puts on her spectacles, organises her papers, blotter, inkwell, and quill, and begins to write. Today, she is working on her third novel, called Mansfield Park. She reads and writes, then she revises and repeats, occasionally pausing to think or gaze out the window. Writing is a pursuit of pleasure for Jane, an activity so utterly absorbing that she loses all sense of time and place. When she puts pen to paper, she is transported far away. To all appearances, she is presently seated in the dining parlour in Chawton, Hampshire. Her mind, however, is 120 miles north in Northamptonshire. Specifically, she is in the grand drawing room of the fictional Mansfield Park, where the shy, sweet Fanny Price makes awkward conversation with her rich relatives. It's a beautiful way to spend the morning hours, and the early afternoon at that. Though eventually, Jane has written all that she can write today, and so tidies up her workspace, putting her paper and pen away. She then stands up, stretches her arms towards the ceiling, and gives her hands a gentle shake. She feels relaxed and accomplished and keen to move on to other pursuits. Thankfully, today there are no pressing house calls to make, no visitors expected here, and not even any letters to read and respond to. So the day is well and truly hers. Jane pauses now to consider her options. She might walk into Alton town with Martha and Cassandra and peruse the shops there. Or maybe she'll help her mother pickle vegetables from the garden, something she always enjoys. She thinks these through and settles on something a bit quieter. Perhaps she'll read a book or practice on the piano. Then Jane remembers she has a bit of sewing that needs to be done. That's what she'll do, she decides. Her mind made up, she heads directly into the empty drawing room, stepping across polished floorboards and retrieving her sewing kit from a wooden cabinet. The drawing room is one of Jane's favorite places in the house, and she pauses momentarily to gaze around it now. The Chawton vine wallpaper is decorated with the white leaves of a sycamore tree. They weave in and around each other, set against a yellowish-green background, the colour of summertime. Here and there, painted family pictures and countryside scenes cover parts of the wall. Her eyes rest on a gold-framed portrait of her brother Edward as a child, hung above a beautiful square piano. Beside the piano is the striking mahogany bureau where her father, the Reverend George Austen, would want to sit and draft his sermons. It's an exquisite piece of furniture, a desk at the lower half and a glass cabinet at the upper. Through the trellised glass doors, she can make out the titles of her father's extensive library. Jane's unrestricted access to these books from an early age form the basis of her informal education. It also ignited a passion for reading that would last a lifetime. She takes a seat now, positioned in between her father's bureau and a large, bright window that looks out onto the garden. Carefully, she arranges her sewing on her lap before threading a needle with cotton and tying a knot at one end. Jane has a reputation for being a neat and skillful needlewoman, an important skill in a household which relies on items being homemade. Over the years, she's repaired shirts for all 6 of her brothers, alongside many a bonnet or nightgown for her sister and mother. At present, she is working on a beautiful white shawl, simply for herself, and embroidering delicate little crosses onto the fine muslin material. Needlework to Jane is as relaxing as it is useful. She works fastidiously with focus, but her expression is one of peace and serenity. She takes great pleasure in the repetitive motion of the needle, gliding up through the surface of the fabric and down again through the other side. Cheerful birdsong drifts in through the window, putting the finishing touch on this calm and tranquil scene. Jane spends an hour or so in this fashion until the sound of her sister's approaching footsteps alerts her to dinner just before 4 o'clock. She returns to the parlour, sitting down beside her family to a 3-course feast of Regency delights. As always, the cook has outdone herself. The first course is a beautiful chestnut soup, wholesome and refreshing. The second is a thick meat pie, topped with pastry leaves that are not unlike those that decorate the walls of the parlour. It's served with a variety of vegetables, all grown in the cottage garden, including cauliflower florets and slices of cabbage, lovingly pickled by Martha in a tangy, flavorful brine. There are also carrots and potatoes, dripping with hot, runny butter. It's a meal so delightful that conversation all but stops, and a wave of satisfaction washes over the room. The final dish is dessert, a triumph of fruits, nuts, and marzipan, accompanied by Martha's cheesecake, famed within these walls. Jane enjoys the cake, delighting in its soft, crumbly texture and sweet, creamy taste. She eats until every last crumb is gone, takes a sip from her wine glass, and emphatically praises Martha's skill in the kitchen. After dinner, the group retires upstairs to the family room. Jane takes up her place upon an elegant chaise longue. As one might expect, the walls of the family room are cluttered with family portraits hung upon a wallpaper that Jane is particularly fond of. Blue and white diagonal patterns swirl like vines. Looking upon these walls, Jane is taken right back to her beloved bench in the garden, where only this morning she soaked up the scents of roses. Gazing out of the window now towards that very place, she notes that the daylight is beginning to fade. She takes a small wooden splint from a box beside the hearth and lights it carefully. Soon there's a golden fire which flickers in the shadows against the walls. Jane lights the 4 candles that stand atop the elegant white mantelpiece, and with the help of her sister, these are placed at each corner of the room. The group then settles into relaxed and happy conversation. They retire here most evenings, often playing parlour games or card games, and occasionally practicing their formal dance routines. Tonight they are in very high spirits and opt to play a series of word games. Participants are challenged to create impromptu rhyming verses using preset words, a task which proves more than a little amusing. This is followed by a game of Regency-style charades, in which rhyming riddles are read aloud by one player at a time, The other players must decipher the subject of the riddle. It's a challenge, and again it results in much laughter and merriment. Time moves rather quickly when spent in such a manner, and soon the day outside gives way to darkness. In the dim glow of candlelight, the women begin to grow weary. Mrs. Austen disappears from the room, returning with a tray of hot cocoa for all. Cups and saucers with steam rising from the top are distributed around the room. The group sits and drinks, quietly enjoying each chocolatey sip. Of course, the night wouldn't be complete without a bedtime story read by the writer-in-residence. And so when Jane finishes her cocoa, she reads a passage from Pride and Prejudice, the family favorite. They listen intently, following the twists and turns of the story, despite having heard it many times before. When the chapter is finished, they give Jane a round of applause. Then, with expressions of love and kindness, they bid each other good night. One by one, they take a candle from each corner of the room and proceed to their separate bedrooms. Jane walks sleepily into her room across the hall and places her candle down upon the windowsill. It sits beside a framed portrait of herself, which was drawn by her sister Cassandra and presented to her as a gift. She changes into a loose-fitting nightgown, hanging her clothes over a chair and placing her jewelry upon the dressing table. Pulling back the white drapes of her four-poster bed, Jane reveals a stunning patchwork quilt. This is the Austen family quilt, which includes 64 different patterns. All were meticulously sewn in diamond shapes across its surface by Jane, Cassandra, and their mother. It was an ambitious project, and it took them an age to complete, but it was a worthwhile effort. Just the sight of it now offers warmth and comfort, and the touch of it is even better. She slides into bed, snuggling beneath this cozy quilt and offering a silent thanks for all that she has. Closing her eyes, Jane's mind scans back over the day. She recalls her blissful walk around the garden, the hours joyfully lost to writing and then sewing, the hilarity of evening charades, and the taste of Martha's cheesecake. Her body relaxed and her heart full of gratitude, she drifts away into a deep and peaceful sleep.